Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight, we're embarking on a journey across thousands of miles and thousands of years, tracing the routes that connected civilizations, carried ideas across deserts and mountains, and shaped the world we know today. As always, let me know where in the world you're listening from. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's begin our exploration of the Silk Road. The story of the Silk Road doesn't begin with merchants or markets, but with war and diplomacy in ancient China. In the year 141 BC, a young emperor named Wu ascended to the throne of the Han Dynasty. He inherited an empire already stretched thin by constant conflict with the Xiongnu, fierce nomadic horsemen who controlled the steppes to the north. These raiders swept down from their territories with devastating regularity, burning crops, stealing livestock, and threatening the stability of Chinese frontier settlements. The attacks weren't random acts of violence, but calculated strikes against an agricultural civilization by people who understood the rhythms of harvest and the vulnerabilities of settled life. Emperor Wu understood that military-wise, force alone couldn't solve the Xiongnu problem. The nomads could simply retreat into the vast steppes where Chinese armies couldn't follow, then return when the soldiers withdrew. What Wu needed was an alliance, a way to attack the Xiongnu from two directions simultaneously. Intelligence reports reaching the Han court spoke of a people called the Yuezhi, who had once lived in the Gansu corridor before being driven westward by Xiongnu attacks around 174 BC. These displaced nomads had supposedly established a new kingdom somewhere in the distant west, and Emperor Wu conceived a bold plan to find them and forge an alliance. The mission fell to Zhang Qian, a palace attendant whose loyalty and organizational abilities had earned him the emperor's trust. In 138 BC, Zhang Qian departed Chang'an with approximately 100 men, including a Xiongnu guide named Gan Fu who possessed crucial knowledge of the Western territories. The expedition represented an enormous gamble, sending a diplomatic mission into unknown lands controlled by the very people they hoped to outflank. The gamble failed almost immediately when Xiongnu forces captured the entire party shortly after they crossed into nomadic territory. Rather than executing their prisoners, the Xiongnu held Zhang Qian and his men in comfortable captivity for about 10 years. During these years, Zhang Qian observed Xiongnu society with the careful attention of a trained diplomat. He noted their sophisticated horse breeding techniques, which produced animals that could survive harsh winters and travel immense distances without tiring. He watched their mobile warfare tactics, understanding how quickly they could assemble forces and strike targets hundreds of miles away. Most importantly, he learned about Central Asian geography and the complex web of trade relationships connecting nomadic peoples with oasis settlements. Around 129 BC, Zhang Qian escaped with a handful of survivors and continued westward toward his original objective. The journey took him through mountain passes where the air grew thin and cold, across desert wastes where water became more precious than gold, and finally to Bactria, where he discovered that the Yuezhi had indeed established a prosperous kingdom. But the diplomatic reality proved bitterly disappointing. The Yuezhi, now settled in fertile valleys with access to established trade routes, showed no interest in mounting costly military campaigns against enemies they'd left behind years ago. They had adapted to their new environment, building cities and cultivating fields, and the distant conflict with the Xiongnu seemed irrelevant to their current prosperity. Despite the diplomatic failure, Zhang Qian's observations in Bactrian markets revealed something potentially more valuable than military alliances. He encountered Chinese silk products that had somehow reached these western regions through chains of intermediary merchants. The silk commanded prices far exceeding its original cost in China, with local rulers and wealthy merchants displaying silk garments as symbols of prestige and sophistication. Chinese lacquerware and bronze mirrors appeared in elite households, having traveled through multiple hands across thousands of miles, with each transaction adding significant markup to the final value. The return journey proved as hazardous as the outward trip. Xiongnu forces captured Zhang Qian's party again, but this time he escaped during a period of internal Xiongnu political turmoil. After 13 years of absence, he finally reached Chinese territory in 126 BC. His detailed reports to Emperor Wu described not only the political landscape of Central Asia, but also the extraordinary economic potential of systematic trade relationships with Western regions. The emperor recognized that while military alliances might prove elusive, commercial opportunities could generate substantial benefits for the empire. Emperor Wu authorized Zhang Qian's second expedition in 115 BC, this time with explicitly commercial objectives. The mission carried substantial quantities of Chinese silk, lacquerware, and metalwork as trade goods rather than diplomatic gifts. Technical specialists accompanied the expedition to assess the quality of foreign products and identify profitable import opportunities. This second journey established direct contact with numerous Central Asian states, including the kingdoms of Fergana, Sogdiana, and Parthia. Each region offered distinct products and commercial opportunities that complemented Chinese goods. Fergana bred exceptional horses that Chinese military commanders coveted for cavalry units. These animals, larger and stronger than Chinese breeds, could carry armored riders and maintain formations during charges that would scatter lighter mounts. Sogdian merchants demonstrated remarkable skill in long-distance trade organization, maintaining networks that connected Indian, Persian, and Mediterranean markets. Their commercial expertise would prove crucial for expanding Chinese access to Western markets. Parthian territories provided access to luxury goods from the Roman Empire, including glassware that was clearer than anything produced in China, precious stones in colors Chinese craftsmen had never seen, and exotic spices that could transform the flavors of food. The Han court's systematic approach to developing Western trade involved establishing official markets in frontier cities where foreign merchants could exchange goods under Chinese supervision. These controlled trading posts allowed imperial officials to collect customs duties while monitoring the flow of strategic materials. Silk production, concentrated in the Yangtze River Valley and surrounding regions, could now reach Western markets through organized channels rather than random intermediary transactions. Silk manufacturing represented one of China's most closely guarded technological secrets. The complex process began with silkworm cultivation, which required maintaining precise temperature and humidity conditions in special buildings. Workers fed the silkworms mulberry leaves at regular intervals, watching carefully as the insects grew and eventually began spinning cocoons. Harvesting the cocoons at exactly the right moment was crucial, neither too early when the silk threads would be weak, nor too late when the emerging moth would break the continuous filament. The cocoons were then placed in hot water to loosen the silk, and skilled workers would find the end of the thread and begin reeling it onto spools. Multiple threads were twisted together to create yarn strong enough for weaving, and finally weavers would create the lustrous fabric that would travel thousands of miles to Western markets. Chinese authorities imposed severe penalties on anyone attempting to export silkworms or reveal production techniques to foreigners. Guards at frontier posts searched departing merchants for contraband, silkworm, eggs, or cocoons. The penalties for smuggling these items could include death, reflecting the government's determination to maintain its monopoly on silk production. This control ensured that all silk reaching Western markets originated from Chinese sources, creating a dependable revenue stream for the imperial treasury. The formation of regular trade networks required solving numerous logistical challenges. Merchants needed reliable information about route conditions, seasonal weather patterns, and political stability in transit regions. The Han government began maintaining diplomatic relationships with various Central Asian rulers specifically to ensure safe passage for Chinese trading expeditions. These arrangements often involved annual tribute payments or gift exchanges that guaranteed protection for merchant caravans traveling through local territories. Parthian merchants emerged as crucial intermediaries in the developing merchant trade system. The Parthian Empire, stretching from the Euphrates River to eastern Iran, controlled key segments of the routes connecting Central Asia with Mediterranean markets. Parthian traders possessed extensive knowledge of Roman commercial preferences and could advise Chinese merchants about product modifications that would increase sales in Western markets. They also provided access to Roman silver coins, which became the preferred medium of exchange for high-value transactions across the trade network. The silver content of these coins was relatively consistent, making them reliable stores of value that merchants from different regions could trust. Roman demand for Chinese silk grew steadily throughout the 1st century BC, driven by fashion trends among wealthy urban populations. Roman writers like Pliny the Elder complained about the enormous sums spent on silk imports, estimating that the empire spent 50 million sesterces annually on silk alone. This figure represented roughly 1% of the imperial treasury's annual revenue, demonstrating the extraordinary scale of Roman silk consumption. The fabric's exceptional lightness made it ideal for the Mediterranean climate, while its lustrous appearance complemented Roman aesthetic preferences for materials that displayed wealth through subtle elegance rather than ostentatious display. The Tarim Basin emerged as the crucial geographical nexus for east-west trade during this foundational period. This vast depression, surrounded by some of the world's highest mountain ranges, contained a series of oasis cities that provided essential services for long-distance travelers. These settlements had developed around natural water sources fed by snowmelt from surrounding peaks, creating islands of fertility in otherwise harsh desert terrain. Without these oases, regular long-distance trade across Central Asia would have been impossible. Kashgar, positioned at the western edge of the Tarim Basin, became the primary entry point for goods moving between Chinese territories and Central Asian markets. The city's location at the convergence of several mountain passes made it a natural gathering point for merchant caravans heading in multiple directions. Local rulers recognized the economic potential of their strategic position and invested in infrastructure improvements that attracted increased commercial traffic. Kashgar's markets featured specialized sections for different categories of goods, with silk merchants occupying the most prestigious locations near the city center. Khotan, located along the southern rim of the Tarim Basin, developed particular expertise in jade processing and luxury textile production. The region's jade deposits had been exploited for centuries, but growing Chinese demand for high-quality jade objects created new commercial opportunities. Khotan's craftsmen developed sophisticated techniques for carving jade into decorative items specifically designed for Chinese markets. The city also became a secondary silk production center, using different techniques from Chinese methods and producing fabrics with distinct characteristics that appealed to certain market segments. Turpan, situated in a depression below sea level, offered unique advantages for long-distance travelers despite its extreme climate. The city's position provided access to reliable water sources and agricultural products, while its location allowed merchants to avoid some of the most difficult mountain crossings. Turpan's residents developed specialized knowledge of desert survival techniques, offering guide services and equipment that proved essential for crossing the Taklamakan Desert. The Taklamakan Desert presented the most formidable obstacle for east-west trade routes. This vast expanse of shifting sand dunes, with summer temperatures exceeding 120 degrees Fahrenheit and winter conditions dropping well below freezing, had claimed countless lives over the centuries. Successful desert crossing required careful timing, adequate water supplies, and experienced guides familiar with seasonal weather patterns. Merchants learned to travel during spring and autumn months when temperatures remained manageable and sandstorms occurred less frequently. Navigation across the Taklamakan relied on a combination of celestial observation, landmark recognition, and local knowledge passed down through generations of desert travelers. Experienced guides could identify subtle terrain features invisible to untrained observers while understanding wind patterns that affected sand dune formation. The desert's southern and northern routes offered different advantages depending on seasonal conditions and political circumstances in various oasis cities. Some merchants preferred the southern route despite its greater length because the oasis cities along that path maintained more stable political conditions. Others chose the northern route for its shorter distance, accepting greater security risks in exchange for reduced travel time. Water management represented the most critical survival skill for desert travelers. Caravans carried water in specially designed leather containers that minimized evaporation while remaining portable across long distances. These containers were treated with special coatings that prevented the leather from absorbing water and kept the contents cool through evaporation from the outer surface. Merchants learned to identify underground water sources by observing vegetation patterns and animal behavior, developing techniques for locating hidden springs that could replenish their supplies. The spacing between reliable water sources determined the maximum distance caravans could travel between oasis stops, typically about 20 to 30 miles, given the carrying capacity of camels and horses. The Pamir Mountains, known to ancient travelers as the roof of the world, presented equally challenging obstacles for trade route development. These towering peaks, with many summits exceeding 20,000 feet in elevation, created a formidable barrier between Central Asian steppes and the Indian subcontinent. Mountain passes remained closed by snow for much of the year, forcing merchants to time their crossings carefully to avoid being trapped by sudden weather changes. High-altitude travel required specialized equipment and techniques unknown to merchants accustomed to desert or steppe conditions. The thin air at extreme elevations caused altitude sickness in both humans and animals, manifesting as headaches, nausea, and difficulty breathing. Merchants learned to acclimatize gradually to increasing elevations, spending days or even weeks at intermediate altitudes before attempting to cross the highest passes. They developed techniques for recognizing dangerous weather conditions that could trap caravans in exposed mountain positions, watching for specific cloud formations and wind patterns that signaled approaching storms. Yak herds provided essential transportation services in high mountain regions where horses and camels could not function effectively. These hardy animals, adapted to extreme cold and high-altitude conditions, could carry substantial loads across terrain impossible for other domesticated animals. Their thick coats protected them from freezing temperatures, while their large lungs and efficient circulatory systems enabled them to function at altitudes that would kill horses. Local populations in mountain regions developed specialized knowledge of yak handling and route finding that proved invaluable to long-distance merchants willing to pay premium fees for their services. The development of reliable route information became crucial for expanding trade networks during this foundational period. Successful merchants maintained detailed records of travel times, seasonal conditions, and local political situations that affected route safety. This information represented valuable commercial intelligence that experienced traders guarded carefully, while sometimes sharing with trusted partners or selling to newcomers entering the trade. The accumulation of this knowledge over generations created an informal but highly effective information network that reduced risks and improved efficiency for merchants operating across vast distances. The commercial networks established during Zhang Qian's expeditions transformed dramatically during the first 3 centuries of the Common Era, evolving from sporadic diplomatic exchanges into systematic trade relationships that connected the Roman Empire directly with Han China. This transformation occurred as both empires reached unprecedented levels of prosperity and territorial control, creating the economic conditions necessary for sustained long-distance commerce, despite the formidable geographical barriers separating East and West. Roman fascination with Chinese silk intensified considerably during the reign of Augustus as the empire's expanding wealth created new markets for luxury goods among the senatorial class and wealthy merchants. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii reveals silk fragments in elite households, while contemporary Roman writers began documenting the social implications of silk consumption with increasing frequency. Pliny the Elder's complaints about gold flowing eastward to pay for silk reflected broader Roman concerns about trade imbalances, but these concerns did little to reduce actual demand for the fabric. The Roman preference for silk stemmed from multiple factors beyond mere fashion considerations. The fabric's exceptional lightness made it comfortable in the Mediterranean climate, particularly during hot summer months when heavier wool garments became unbearable. The lustrous appearance of silk complemented Roman aesthetic preferences for materials that displayed wealth through subtle elegance rather than ostentatious display. Roman women particularly favored silk for its draping qualities, which enhanced the flowing lines of traditional Roman garments. The fabric's rarity also served important social functions, allowing wealthy families to demonstrate their economic status through clothing choices that clearly distinguished them from lower social classes. Roman merchants developed sophisticated techniques for marketing Chinese silk to maximize profits within the empire's established commercial networks. They discovered that Roman consumers preferred silk dyed in specific colors, particularly deep purples and rich reds that complemented Roman color symbolism. Purple, associated with imperial authority and high social status, commanded the highest prices when applied to silk fabrics. This market intelligence traveled back along trade routes, influencing Chinese production decisions and creating the first examples of international market adaptation in silk manufacturing. Chinese artisans began producing silk specifically for Roman tastes, using dyeing techniques that created colors unavailable in domestic Chinese markets. The Parthian Empire's strategic position between Roman and Chinese territories allowed Parthian merchants to establish themselves as indispensable intermediaries in the silk trade. Parthian traders maintained permanent representatives in both Roman Syria and Chinese frontier cities, creating communication networks that transmitted market information across thousands of miles. These merchant families developed expertise in currency exchange, language interpretation, and diplomatic protocols that proved essential for facilitating transactions between parties who rarely met face to face. A Parthian merchant in Ctesiphon might receive information about Roman market conditions from his correspondent in Antioch, while simultaneously learning about Chinese silk production levels from his representative in Dunhuang, enabling him to make informed decisions about purchasing and pricing strategies. Parthian control over Western trade route segments enabled them to implement sophisticated pricing strategies that maximized their profits while maintaining sufficient price predictability to encourage continued Roman investment in silk purchases. They established standardized markup rates for different categories of goods, with silk commanding the highest premiums due to its exceptional demand in Roman markets. Parthian merchants also developed quality grading systems that allowed Roman buyers to specify desired silk characteristics without physically examining the goods before purchase. These grading systems considered factors like thread count, weave tightness, and dye quality, creating classification schemes that facilitated long-distance transactions. The Parthian taxation system along trade routes created both obstacles and opportunities for long-distance commerce. Parthian authorities collected customs duties at multiple points along major trade routes, but they also provided security services and maintained infrastructure that reduced overall transportation costs. Parthian investment in road construction, bridge maintenance, and way station development created more reliable travel conditions that reduced the risks associated with long-distance commerce. These improvements allowed merchant caravans to travel faster and carry larger loads, partially offsetting the impact of taxation on final prices. Parthian diplomatic relationships with various Central Asian kingdoms proved crucial for maintaining stable trade conditions during periods of political instability. When local conflicts disrupted specific route segments, Parthian officials could negotiate alternative arrangements or provide military escorts for merchant caravans. These services commanded premium fees, but they ensured that trade could continue even during periods of regional warfare or political upheaval. The Parthian ability to maintain commercial operations across politically fragmented territories demonstrated the sophisticated diplomatic skills that had enabled them to build their empire. The rise of the Sasanian Empire in 224 AD initially disrupted established trade patterns as new rulers implemented different policies toward long-distance commerce. However, the Sasanians quickly recognized the revenue potential of silk trade taxation and developed even more systematic approaches to managing trans-Asian commerce. Sasanian officials created standardized documentation requirements for merchant caravans, established fixed fee schedules for various services, and implemented quality control measures that reduced disputes between buyers and sellers. Sasanian investment in trade infrastructure exceeded Parthian efforts in both scale and sophistication. The new empire constructed caravanserais at regular intervals along major routes, providing standardized accommodations and services for traveling merchants. These facilities included secure storage areas for valuable goods, maintenance services for pack animals, and meeting spaces where merchants could negotiate transactions with local representatives. The caravanserais also served as information centers where travelers could obtain current intelligence about route conditions, political developments, and market opportunities in distant cities. The development of standardized weights and measures across different regions represented one of the most significant achievements of the classical period trade networks. This standardization emerged from practical necessity as merchants struggled with the complexity of converting between different measurement systems used by various kingdoms and city-states along trade routes. Roman merchants accustomed to standardized imperial measurements found themselves dealing with Chinese units based on entirely different mathematical principles, while Central Asian traders used systems derived from various local traditions. Chinese officials took the initiative in promoting measurement standardization by establishing reference weights and measures in frontier trading cities that foreign merchants could use for verification purposes. These standards, based on Han imperial measurements, provided reliable benchmarks for international transactions. Chinese authorities also trained local officials in conversion techniques that allowed them to translate between Chinese and foreign measurement systems accurately. This technical expertise proved invaluable for resolving disputes and ensuring fair transactions between parties using different measurement conventions. The adoption of standardized silver currency for high-value transactions solved many of the practical problems associated with long-distance trade. Roman silver coins, particularly denarii and auri, gained acceptance throughout Central Asian markets due to their consistent weight and purity standards. Chinese merchants learned to evaluate Roman coins based on silver content rather than nominal values, creating a de facto international currency system based on precious metal weight rather than political authority. This approach enabled merchants from different regions to conduct transactions without requiring detailed knowledge of foreign monetary systems. Sasanian merchants developed sophisticated banking techniques that reduced the risks associated with transporting large quantities of coins across dangerous territories. They established credit arrangements that allowed merchants to deposit silver in Sasanian cities and withdraw equivalent amounts in distant locations, effectively creating the first international banking system. These arrangements required extensive record-keeping and communication networks, but they dramatically reduced the security risks and transportation costs associated with moving precious metals across thousands of miles. The westward transmission of papermaking technology during this period illustrates the broader patterns of technological exchange that accompanied commercial relationships. Chinese papermaking techniques, closely guarded secrets during the Han period, gradually spread westward through Central Asian communities as Chinese artisans settled in trading cities along major routes. The technology's diffusion occurred slowly and unevenly, with each region adapting Chinese methods to local materials and requirements. Samarkand emerged as the first major Central Asian center for paper production, using techniques learned from Chinese craftsmen who had established workshops in the city during the 2nd century AD. Samarkand papermakers modified Chinese methods to work with local fiber sources, creating papers with different characteristics from Chinese originals. The city's strategic position allowed Samarkand paper to reach both Western and Southern markets, introducing the technology to Persian and eventually Arab territories. The eastward spread of Roman glassmaking techniques created similar patterns of technological adaptation and regional specialization. Roman glass production methods, particularly techniques for creating clear, colorless glass, attracted intense interest from Chinese artisans, who had previously worked primarily with colored glass containing various impurities. Roman merchants brought glass samples to Chinese markets, where local craftsmen analyzed the products and attempted to replicate the manufacturing processes. Chinese glassmakers developed hybrid techniques that combined Roman methods with traditional Chinese approaches, creating glass products with unique characteristics that appealed to both domestic and international markets. These innovations included new decorative techniques that incorporated traditional Chinese artistic motifs with Roman technical methods, producing glass objects that commanded premium prices in both Eastern and Western markets. The exchange demonstrated how commercial relationships could facilitate technological transfer and innovation across vast cultural distances. The exchange of agricultural products and cultivation techniques accompanied the more visible trade in luxury goods. Chinese peaches, apricots, and various spices traveled westward along trade routes, while Roman grapes, walnuts, and certain grains moved eastward. These exchanges required careful attention to preservation techniques and transportation methods that could maintain product quality over long distances and extended time periods. Some fruits could be dried for transport, while others required special packing materials or climate-controlled storage during certain seasons. Roman wine reached Chinese markets during this period, though in limited quantities due to transportation difficulties and Chinese preferences for different alcoholic beverages. Chinese merchants discovered that Roman wine could be preserved for long-distance transport by adding various spices and honey, creating modified products that appealed to Chinese tastes while maintaining recognizable Roman characteristics. These adaptations demonstrated the flexibility and creativity that merchants applied to expanding their markets. The transmission of medical knowledge and pharmaceutical products created another important dimension of classical period. Exchanges. Chinese medical texts describing acupuncture techniques and herbal remedies reached Roman territories, where Greek and Roman physicians incorporated selected elements into their own medical practices. Roman medical knowledge, particularly surgical techniques and anatomical understanding developed through gladiatorial medicine, traveled eastward and influenced Chinese medical development. These exchanges occurred gradually through personal contacts between physicians and scholars rather than systematic translation programs, but they contributed to the advancement of medical knowledge in both regions. Chinese silk production expanded dramatically during this period to meet growing international demand. New silk-producing regions developed in areas previously devoted to other agricultural activities, while existing production centers invested in improved equipment and techniques that increased both quantity and quality of silk output. The imperial government established quality control standards for export silk that ensured consistent characteristics for international markets. These standards specified minimum thread counts, maximum acceptable defects, and proper dyeing procedures that export silk must meet. The development of silk dyeing techniques specifically for export markets created new categories of Chinese silk products. Chinese dyers learned to produce colors that matched Roman preferences while maintaining the technical quality that distinguished Chinese silk from inferior imitations produced in other regions. These specialized dyeing processes required imported materials, including certain minerals and plant extracts available only from Western sources, creating reverse trade flows that complemented the primary eastward movement of silver and gold. Regional variations in trade route development reflected local geographical conditions and political circumstances. The northern routes through the Dzungarian Basin offered advantages during certain seasons, but remained vulnerable to nomadic raids and extreme weather conditions. The southern routes through the Tarim Basin provided more reliable conditions but required longer travel times and presented different logistical challenges. Merchants developed specialized knowledge about optimal timing for different route segments, creating complex scheduling systems that maximized travel efficiency while minimizing exposure to seasonal hazards. The merchant communities established across Central Asian trading cities during the classical period created foundations for one of history's most significant religious transformations. These commercial networks, initially focused on silk, precious metals, and luxury goods, became the primary conduits for Buddhist ideas, texts, and artistic traditions spreading from India through Central Asia into China. The process began during the 1st century AD when Indian Buddhist monks discovered that the same caravan routes carrying Chinese silk westward could transport religious teachings eastward with equal efficiency. Buddhist transmission along the Silk Road differed fundamentally from the religion's earlier spread within the Indian subcontinent. Rather than moving through established political structures or existing religious hierarchies, Buddhism traveled through commercial networks where merchants from different cultural backgrounds regularly interacted and exchanged not only goods but ideas, customs, and beliefs. This commercial context shaped how Buddhism adapted to new environments and influenced the particular forms the religion took as it moved across diverse cultural landscapes. The Kushan Empire, which controlled crucial segments of the trade routes during the 1st through 3rd centuries AD, played a decisive role in facilitating Buddhist expansion. Kushan rulers, themselves converts to Buddhism, actively promoted the religion while simultaneously encouraging commercial development. Emperor Kanishka, who scholars believe ruled from approximately 127 to 150 AD, exemplified this dual commitment by commissioning Buddhist art and architecture while maintaining policies that attracted merchants from across the known world to Kushan territories. Kanishka's capital at Peshawar became a major center for both Buddhist scholarship and international commerce. The city's monasteries housed monks from India, Central Asia, and China who collaborated on translating Sanskrit Buddhist texts into various local languages. These translation projects required extensive knowledge of multiple languages and cultures, skills that the international merchant communities possessed in abundance. Merchants often served as interpreters and cultural mediators, helping monks understand local customs and religious practices that needed to be considered when adapting Buddhist teachings for new audiences. The Gandhara region, encompassing parts of modern Pakistan and Afghanistan, emerged as the primary artistic center, where Buddhist iconography absorbed influences from Greek, Roman, Persian, and Central Asian artistic traditions. This cultural synthesis occurred because Gandhara's position along major trade routes brought together artisans and patrons from diverse backgrounds who contributed different aesthetic preferences and technical skills to Buddhist art production. The resulting Gandhara school of Buddhist art featured realistic human figures with Greek-influenced facial features, Roman-style drapery, and Persian decorative motifs, creating a distinctive international artistic language. Gandhara sculptors developed standardized iconographic conventions for depicting Buddhist figures that could be understood across different cultural contexts. These artistic standards traveled along trade routes with merchant caravans, spreading consistent visual representations of Buddhist concepts to distant regions. A merchant familiar with Gandhara Buddhist art could recognize similar iconographic elements in Buddhist sculptures produced in Khotan, Kucha, or Chang'an, creating a visual continuity across the vast geographical expanse of the Silk Road network. The monastery complex at Bamiyan, situated in a strategic mountain valley connecting Central Asian steppes with Indian territories, became one of the most important Buddhist centers along the trade routes. The site's massive Buddha statues, carved directly into cliff faces during the 3rd through 6th centuries AD, served multiple functions beyond their obvious religious significance. These monuments marked Bamiyan's location for travelers navigating through complex mountain terrain, while their impressive scale demonstrated the wealth and devotion of the local Buddhist community to passing merchants and pilgrims. Bamiyan's monasteries provided essential services for long-distance travelers, including secure accommodation, medical care, and spiritual guidance. The monks maintained detailed knowledge of regional geography and seasonal travel conditions, offering route advice that proved invaluable for merchant caravans attempting to cross dangerous mountain passes. This practical assistance created positive relationships between Buddhist communities and commercial networks, encouraging merchants to support monastery construction and maintenance through donations and patronage. The monastic communities at Bamiyan developed sophisticated agricultural and craft production systems that made them largely self-sufficient while generating surplus goods for trade. Monks produced high-quality textiles, metalwork, and agricultural products that commanded premium prices in regional markets. These economic activities provided monasteries with steady income streams that supported their religious functions while demonstrating Buddhist principles of productive labor and community service. Buddhist merchants played crucial roles in transmitting religious ideas because their commercial activities required them to build trust relationships with trading partners from different cultural backgrounds. These business relationships often evolved into discussions about philosophical and religious topics, creating opportunities for Buddhist merchants to share their beliefs with interested colleagues. The gradual personal nature of these exchanges proved more effective than formal missionary activities in many contexts, as people were more receptive to ideas shared by trusted business partners than to teachings imposed by foreign religious authorities. Sogdian merchants, who dominated much of the Central Asian trade during the 4th through 8th centuries AD, became particularly important agents of Buddhist transmission. Their extensive commercial networks connected Buddhist communities across thousands of miles, while their linguistic skills enabled them to translate Buddhist concepts between different languages and cultural contexts. Sogdian Buddhist merchants established temples and monasteries in cities throughout Central Asia, creating a network of religious institutions that supported both spiritual and commercial activities. The Sogdian language became a lingua franca for Buddhist texts and correspondence across Central Asia during this period. Sogdian translations of Sanskrit Buddhist scriptures made these teachings accessible to populations who could not read Sanskrit or Chinese, while Sogdian Buddhist correspondence connected monasteries and merchant communities across vast distances. Archaeological discoveries of Sogdian Buddhist documents from sites like Dunhuang reveal the extensive communication networks that linked Buddhist communities along the trade routes. Dunhuang emerged as perhaps the most significant Buddhist center along the eastern sections of the Silk Road, combining religious, commercial, and cultural functions in ways that exemplify the integration of Buddhism with trade route society. The city's location at the convergence of multiple trade routes made it a natural gathering point for merchants, pilgrims, and scholars traveling between China and Central Asia. This cosmopolitan environment created ideal conditions for Buddhist development and artistic innovation. The Mogao caves at Dunhuang, carved and decorated between the 4th and 14th centuries AD, represent the most comprehensive record of Buddhist art and culture along the Silk Road. These cave temples, numbering nearly 500 individual chambers, contain Buddhist paintings, sculptures, and manuscripts that document the evolution of Buddhist artistic styles and religious practices across nearly a millennium. The caves also reveal the central role of merchant patronage in supporting Buddhist art production, with many chambers containing donor portraits of wealthy merchants and their families. Dunhuang's scriptoriums produced Buddhist texts in multiple languages and scripts, serving the diverse linguistic needs of the international community that frequented the city. Monks and scribes working in Dunhuang created Chinese translations of Sanskrit and Central Asian Buddhist texts, while also producing original commentaries and interpretations that reflected local understanding of Buddhist teachings. The famous library cave at Dunhuang, sealed in the 11th century and rediscovered in 1900, contained over 40,000 manuscripts and printed documents that provide unprecedented insight into Buddhist intellectual life along the Silk Road. The transmission of Buddhism to China required extensive adaptation of Indian dollar religious concepts to Chinese philosophical and cultural frameworks. This process involved not just translation of Sanskrit terms into Chinese language, but fundamental reinterpretation of Buddhist ideas to make them comprehensible within Chinese intellectual traditions. Early Chinese Buddhist translators struggled with concepts like karma and rebirth that had no direct equivalence in Chinese thought, leading to creative solutions that combined Buddhist and Chinese ideas in new ways. Kumarajiva, a Buddhist monk from Kucha who reached Chang'an in 401 AD, revolutionized Chinese Buddhism through his translation work and teaching activities. Born to an Indian father and Kuchian mother, Kumarajiva possessed the multicultural background necessary to bridge Indian Buddhist scholarship with Chinese intellectual traditions. His translations of major Mahayana texts, including the Lotus Sutra and works by Nagarjuna, established Chinese Buddhist terminology and interpretative frameworks that influenced Chinese Buddhism for centuries. Kumarajiva's translation methodology emphasized meaning over literal accuracy, allowing him to render complex Sanskrit philosophical concepts in Chinese terms that captured essential Buddhist ideas while remaining comprehensible to Chinese readers. His translation team, which included both Chinese and Central Asian scholars, developed systematic approaches to handling Sanskrit terms that had no Chinese equivalents. These innovations created a distinctively Chinese Buddhist vocabulary that enabled the religion to develop independently of its Indian origins. The Chinese Buddhist pilgrim Faxian, who traveled from China to India between 399 and 414 AD, documented the extensive Buddhist communities he encountered along the Silk Road routes. His detailed travel account describes flourishing monasteries in cities like Khotan, Kashgar, and Gandhara, revealing how completely Buddhism had integrated into the commercial and cultural life of these trading centers. Faxian's observations provide crucial evidence for understanding how Buddhism functioned within Silk Road society during the early 5th century AD. Faxian's journey illustrates the close connections between commercial and religious travel along the Silk Road. He frequently traveled with merchant caravans for security and logistical support, while his religious status provided him with accommodation and assistance from Buddhist communities along his route. His account describes the practical arrangements that enabled long-distance religious travel, including the network of monasteries that provided hospitality for traveling monks and pilgrims. The most famous Chinese Buddhist pilgrim, Xuanzang, undertook his journey to India between 629 and 645 AD, during the Tang Dynasty's golden age. His travels coincided with a period of unprecedented prosperity and cultural exchange along the Silk Road, allowing him to observe Buddhist communities at their peak of development and influence. Xuanzang's detailed records provide comprehensive documentation of Buddhist institutions, practices, and scholarly activities across Central Asia and India during the 7th century AD. Xuanzang's translation work after his return to China represented the culmination of several centuries of Chinese Buddhist development. His translations, produced with support from the Tang imperial court, achieved unprecedented accuracy and completeness in rendering Sanskrit Buddhist texts into Chinese. The Translation Bureau established for Xuanzang's work employed dozens of scholars fluent in Sanskrit, Chinese, and various Central Asian languages, creating the most sophisticated translation operation in medieval history. The artistic traditions that developed at Buddhist sites along the Silk Road reflected the cosmopolitan nature of these trading communities. Buddhist art in cities like Kizil, Kumtura, and Bezeklik incorporated artistic elements from India, Persia, Central Asia, and China, creating distinctive regional styles that could not have developed in isolation from the cultural exchanges facilitated by long-distance trade. These artistic syntheses demonstrate how Buddhism served as a vehicle for broader cultural integration across the Silk Road network. The cave temples at Kizil, dating from the 3rd through 8th centuries AD, contain some of the finest examples of Central Asian Buddhist art. The paintings in these caves combine Indian Buddhist iconography with Persian decorative motifs and Central Asian artistic techniques, creating a unique aesthetic that influenced Buddhist art development across the region. The Kizil paintings also reveal the ethnic diversity of Buddhist communities, depicting donors and worshippers with distinctly different facial features and clothing styles representing various Central Asian populations. Buddhist monasteries along the trade routes developed economic functions that extended far beyond their religious activities. These institutions served as banks, providing secure storage for merchants' valuables and offering credit arrangements for commercial transactions. Monasteries also functioned as information centers where merchants could obtain current intelligence about market conditions, political developments, and route safety in distant regions. These services created mutually beneficial relationships between Buddhist communities and commercial networks. The integration of Buddhist institutions into Silk Road economic systems enabled monasteries to accumulate substantial wealth that supported ambitious construction projects and artistic commissions. The massive scale of Buddhist monuments at sites like Bamiyan, Yongang, and Longmen required enormous financial resources that could only be generated through successful participation in long-distance trade networks. These projects in turn attracted skilled artisans from across the known world, creating centers of artistic innovation and cultural exchange. Buddhist festivals and ceremonies became important social events in Silk Road cities, bringing together diverse populations for shared religious and cultural experiences. These gatherings provided opportunities for merchants from different backgrounds to develop personal relationships that facilitated business transactions while also creating forums for cultural exchange and artistic collaboration. The international character of Buddhist communities along the trade routes made these religious institutions natural centers for cross-cultural interaction and communication. The establishment of the Tang Dynasty in 618 AD marked the beginning of the most prosperous and culturally dynamic period in Silk Road history. Unlike their predecessors, the Tang emperors pursued aggressive expansionist policies that extended Chinese control deep into Central Asia, creating the largest empire in Chinese history and establishing direct administrative control over vast stretches of the trade routes that had previously operated under loose diplomatic arrangements. Emperor Taizong's military campaigns during the 632nd and 642nd AD systematically conquered the Tarim Basin kingdoms that had maintained semi-independent status for centuries. The conquest of Gaocheng in 640 AD eliminated the last major independent power in the eastern Tarim Basin, while subsequent campaigns against Kucha, Kashgar, and other oasis cities brought the entire region under direct Chinese administration. These conquests differed from earlier Chinese involvement in Central Asia, which had relied primarily on tributary relationships and diplomatic alliances rather than direct territorial control. The Tang Protectorate system, known as the Protectorate General to pacify the West, established Chinese military garrisons and administrative centers throughout Central Asia. The Protectorate headquarters at Kucha controlled a network of fortified positions extending from Dunhuang in the east to Samarkand in the west, with subsidiary commands at Kashgar, Khotan, and Karashar. Each garrison maintained several hundred Chinese soldiers supported by local auxiliary troops, creating a military presence capable of protecting trade routes and enforcing imperial policies across thousands of miles of territory. Chinese military engineers constructed an extensive network of beacon towers and fortified way stations that provided communication and logistical support for the protectorate forces. These installations, spaced at regular intervals along major trade routes, enabled rapid transmission of military intelligence and administrative orders across the vast distances of Central Asia. The beacon tower system could relay urgent messages from Kashgar to Chang'an in less than 10 days, a remarkable achievement given the geographical obstacles involved. The protectorate system required unprecedented administrative sophistication to govern the diverse populations and complex economic relationships of Central Asian territories. Chinese officials developed specialized knowledge of local languages, customs, and legal traditions, while implementing imperial policies that accommodated regional variations in social organization and economic practices. The Tang legal code was modified to address situations unique to Central Asian territories, including regulations for managing international trade, resolving disputes between merchants from different countries, and maintaining security along caravan routes. Chang'an, the Tang capital, experienced explosive growth during this period, as it became the eastern terminus of an integrated trade network extending across the entire Eurasian continent. The city's population reached approximately 1 million inhabitants by 700 AD, making it the largest city in the world at that time. Chang'an's cosmopolitan character reflected its position at the center of international trade networks, with foreign merchants, diplomats, and scholars comprising a significant portion of the urban population. The Western market in Chang'an occupied over 1,600 acres and contained more than 3,000 shops organized into specialized sections for different categories of goods. The market's international character was immediately apparent to visitors who encountered merchants speaking dozens of languages while selling products from across the known world. Persian carpets, Indian spices, Central Asian horses, and Byzantine goldwork competed for space with Chinese silk, porcelain, and lacquerware in a commercial environment unlike anything previously seen in human history. Foreign merchants in Chang'an established permanent communities with their own temples, schools, and social organizations that maintained cultural connections to their homelands while adapting to Chinese urban life. The Sogdian merchant community, numbering several thousand individuals, constructed elaborate mansions in the city's western districts and commissioned Chinese artisans to create hybrid architectural styles that combined Central Asian and Chinese design elements. These residences featured traditional Chinese courtyard layouts with Persian-influenced decorative motifs and Central Asian furniture arrangements. The Tang government's policies toward foreign merchants reflected sophisticated understanding of international commerce that balanced revenue generation with the need to maintain attractive conditions for long-distance traders. Imperial officials established standardized taxation rates for imported goods that were high enough to generate substantial government revenue but not so excessive as to discourage trade. The government also provided security services, maintained commercial infrastructure, and offered legal protections that made Chang'an an attractive destination for merchants from across Eurasia. Tang customs officials developed detailed classification systems for imported goods that enabled precise taxation while preventing disputes over commodity categories and valuations. These systems required extensive knowledge of foreign products and manufacturing techniques, leading to the creation of specialized bureaucratic positions for officials with international commercial expertise. The government maintained reference collections of foreign goods that customs officials could use to verify the authenticity and quality of imported merchandise. The diversification of trade goods during the Tang period transformed the finest and character of Silk Road commerce from its earlier focus on luxury items for elite consumers. While silk remained an important export product, Chinese merchants began shipping porcelain, tea, paper, and various manufactured goods that appealed to broader market segments in foreign countries. This diversification reflected both increased production capacity in China and growing demand for Chinese products among middle-class consumers in Central Asian and Middle Eastern markets. Chinese porcelain production expanded dramatically during the Tang period as potters developed new techniques for creating high-quality ceramics that could survive the rigors of long-distance transportation. Tang porcelain featured distinctive glazes and decorative styles that appealed to foreign consumers, while maintaining the technical superiority that distinguished Chinese ceramics from products manufactured in other regions. The development of specialized packing techniques using straw, silk padding, and wooden containers enabled porcelain to reach distant markets without significant breakage. Tea cultivation and processing emerged as major Chinese export industries during the Tang period, introducing this beverage to Central Asian and Middle Eastern populations who had previously been unfamiliar with tea consumption. Chinese merchants discovered that tea's lightweight and high value made it ideal for long-distance trade, while its preservation qualities enabled it to maintain quality during extended transportation periods. The development of compressed tea bricks specifically for export markets created standardized products that could be easily transported and traded. The westward transmission of papermaking technology accelerated during the Tang period, as Chinese artisans established workshops in Central Asian cities under imperial sponsorship. These government-supported technology transfers were designed to create local paper production capacity that could support Chinese administrative activities while generating additional export revenue. The paper workshops at Samarkand, established with Chinese technical assistance during the 8th century AD, became major suppliers for Middle Eastern markets and contributed to the eventual spread of papermaking technology to the Islamic world. Incoming trade goods reflected the unprecedented geographical scope of Tang commercial networks. Arabian horses, prized for their speed and endurance, arrived in Chang'an through Central Asian intermediaries who had developed specialized knowledge of equine breeding and training. These horses commanded enormous prices in Chinese markets, where military officials and wealthy civilians competed to acquire animals with superior bloodlines and proven performance capabilities. Precious stones from various regions created new categories of luxury goods in Chinese markets. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, rubies from Burma, and pearls from the Persian Gulf reached Chang'an through complex trading networks that involved multiple intermediaries and transportation methods. Chinese artisans developed new jewelry-making techniques specifically designed to showcase these foreign gemstones, creating hybrid artistic styles that combine traditional Chinese metalwork with international decorative elements. Spices and aromatics from India and Southeast Asia transformed Chinese cuisine and religious practices during this period. Black pepper, cardamom, and various other spices that had previously been unknown in China became important ingredients in both imperial court cuisine and popular cooking. The importation of frankincense and other aromatic substances supported the expansion of Buddhist religious practices while creating new categories of luxury consumption among wealthy Chinese families. The cultural flowering that occurred along the Silk Road during the Tang period reflected the unprecedented level of international interaction facilitated by political stability and economic prosperity. Chinese poets, musicians, and artists absorbed influences from Central Asian traditions while contributing their own innovations to the cosmopolitan culture that developed in major trading cities. This cultural synthesis produced artistic achievements that could not have emerged in isolation from the international exchanges enabled by long-distance trade. Tang poetry reached its greatest heights during this period, with poets like Li Bai and Du Fu creating works that incorporated imagery and themes derived from their exposure to foreign cultures and landscapes. Li Bai's poems frequently referenced Central Asian geography, foreign customs, and international travel experiences that reflected the cosmopolitan environment of Tang society. His famous poem, The Road to Shu, drew upon his knowledge of the dangerous mountain routes that connected China with Central Asian territories, creating literary works that captured the adventurous spirit of the Silk Road era. Musical exchanges between Chinese and Central Asian traditions produced new instrumental techniques and compositional styles that influenced court entertainment and popular culture. The pipa, a stringed instrument derived from Central Asian prototypes, became central to Tang court music while undergoing modifications that adapted it to Chinese musical preferences. Chinese musicians learned Central Asian playing techniques while developing new musical forms that combined Chinese melodic structures with foreign rhythmic patterns. Dance traditions from various Central Asian cultures merged with Chinese performance styles to create new forms of entertainment that became popular in both court and commercial contexts. The Western region dance performed in Tang palaces incorporated movements, costumes, and musical accompaniment derived from Sogdian, Persian, and Turkish traditions while maintaining Chinese aesthetic principles. These performances required extensive cultural knowledge and artistic skill, creating new categories of professional entertainers who specialized in international performance styles. The Tang imperial court's patronage of international artists and scholars created an environment that encouraged cultural innovation and artistic experimentation. Foreign musicians, painters, and craftsmen received imperial commissions that provided them with resources and status, while exposing Chinese audiences to artistic traditions from across Eurasia. The court maintained workshops where Chinese and foreign artisans collaborated on projects that combined different technical traditions and aesthetic approaches. Religious architecture along the Silk Road during the Tang period reflected the diverse spiritual traditions that coexisted in the cosmopolitan trading cities. Buddhist temples incorporated architectural elements from Indian, Persian, and Central Asian traditions while maintaining Chinese structural principles. The giant wild goose pagoda in Chang'an, built to house Buddhist scriptures brought from India by Xuanzang, exemplified the international character of Tang religious architecture through its combination of Chinese construction techniques with Indian influence proportions and decorative elements. Zoroastrian fire temples in Chinese cities served Persian merchant communities while introducing Chinese populations to foreign religious practices and architectural styles. These temples featured distinctive design elements that accommodated Zoroastrian ritual requirements while conforming to Chinese building regulations and aesthetic preferences. The coexistence of multiple religious traditions in Tang cities created unprecedented opportunities for theological dialogue and philosophical exchange. The Nestorian Christian community in Chang'an constructed churches that combined Byzantine architectural principles with Chinese construction techniques and decorative styles. The famous Nestorian stele, erected in 781 AD, documented the history of Christianity in China while demonstrating the sophisticated theological knowledge that developed through contact between Chinese and Middle Eastern Christian traditions. The stele's bilingual inscription in Chinese and Syriac reflected the multicultural character of religious communities along the Silk Road. Islamic merchants and scholars began appearing in Chinese cities during the later Tang period, introducing another major religious tradition to the cosmopolitan mix of Silk Road society. The construction of the first mosques in Chinese territory required architectural innovations that adapted Islamic spatial requirements to Chinese building traditions and urban planning principles. These early mosques established precedents for Islamic architecture in China that influenced religious building design for centuries. The Tang government's policies toward foreign religions reflected a pragmatic approach that balanced tolerance for diversity with concern for social stability and political control. Imperial officials generally permitted foreign religious practices as long as they did not challenge political authority or disrupt social order. This tolerance created an environment where different religious traditions could coexist and interact, leading to theological exchanges and philosophical syntheses that enriched the intellectual life of Silk Road communities. Commercial law during the Tang period evolved to address the complex legal issues that arose from international, trade relationships. Chinese legal officials developed expertise in foreign commercial practices and contractual arrangements while creating new legal procedures for resolving disputes between merchants from different countries with different legal traditions. The Tang legal code included specific provisions for international commercial transactions that established precedents for medieval international trade law. The standardization of weights, measures, and currency across Tang territories facilitated commercial transactions while reducing opportunities for fraud and disputes. Imperial officials established reference standards in major trading cities that merchants could use to verify the accuracy of their measuring equipment and currency. These standards were regularly updated and maintained by specialized bureaucratic offices that ensured consistency across the vast geographical extent of the Tang Empire. Banking and credit arrangements became increasingly sophisticated during this period, as merchants developed new financial instruments to manage the risks and complexities of long-distance trade. Chinese merchants established correspondent relationships with foreign trading partners that enabled them to conduct business without transporting large quantities of precious metals across dangerous territories. These arrangements required extensive trust networks and communication systems that connected commercial communities across thousands of miles. The Tang postal system, originally designed for government communications, expanded to provide commercial messaging services that enabled merchants to coordinate business activities across vast distances. The system's network of post stations and relay riders could transmit commercial correspondence from Chang'an to Central Asian cities in a matter of weeks, enabling business relationships that would have been impossible without reliable communication infrastructure. The decline of Tang authority in Central Asia during the mid-8th century created a power vacuum that Arab military forces rapidly exploited, fundamentally altering the political, commercial, and cultural landscape of the Silk Road. The Arab conquest of Transoxiana, beginning with the capture of Bukhara in 709 AD, and culminating in the decisive victory over Chinese forces at the Battle of Talas in 751 AD, marked the end of Chinese political dominance in Western Central Asia and initiated a new phase of Islamic influence that would reshape trade networks across the entire region. The Battle of Talas itself proved less significant for its immediate military consequences than for its long-term cultural and technological implications. The Arab victory, achieved through superior cavalry tactics and strategic alliance with local Turkic forces dissatisfied with Chinese rule, resulted in the capture of numerous Chinese prisoners, including skilled artisans and craftsmen. Traditional accounts from the 11th century historian Al-Tha'alabi suggest these prisoners introduced papermaking to Samarkand, but modern scholarship has complicated this narrative. Archaeological evidence reveals that paper was already being produced in Central Asia before 751 AD, with paper fragments dating to the 4th and 5th centuries found in the Turpan and Gaochang areas, suggesting the technology had spread gradually over centuries rather than through a single dramatic event. The Umayyad and subsequent Abbasid administrations approached Central Asian governance with pragmatic flexibility that differed markedly from earlier Chinese administrative methods. Rather than imposing uniform Islamic law across diverse populations, Arab administrators developed accommodating policies that permitted local customs to continue alongside Islamic practices, provided they did not directly contradict fundamental Islamic principles. This approach proved particularly effective in maintaining commercial relationships with non-Muslim merchants and communities whose participation remained essential for trade network operations. The conversion process in Central Asian territories proceeded gradually and unevenly, often following commercial and social networks rather than administrative boundaries. Sogdian merchant families, recognizing the advantages of religious affiliation with the new ruling elite, frequently adopted Islam while maintaining their established business relationships and commercial practices. These conversions created hybrid cultural forms that combined Islamic religious observance with traditional Central Asian commercial customs and social arrangements. Samarkand emerged as the preeminent Islamic commercial center in Central Asia during the 9th and 10th centuries, surpassing even Baghdad in certain categories of international trade. The city's strategic position at the convergence of routes from China, India, Persia, and the Middle East made it an ideal location for the complex commercial operations that characterized Islamic period trade. Samarkand's markets specialized in high-value goods requiring sophisticated commercial expertise, including Chinese silk, Indian precious stones, Persian carpets, and various luxury manufactured products from across the Islamic world. The Samanid dynasty, ruling from Bukhara between 875 and 999 AD, created the most successful synthesis of Islamic governance with Central Asian commercial traditions. The Samanids maintained nominal allegiance to the Abbasid Caliphate while exercising practical independence in managing their territory's economic and commercial affairs. Their policies actively encouraged long-distance trade through infrastructure investment, legal standardization, and diplomatic arrangements that facilitated merchant activities across their extensive territories. Samanid silver mines in the Panjia Valley and other locations provided the monetary foundation for expanded commercial activities throughout Central Asia and beyond. The consistent quality and weight of Samanid silver dirhams made them the preferred currency for international transactions across a vast geographical area, extending from the Baltic Sea to the Indian Ocean. Archaeological evidence reveals salmonid coins in Scandinavian hoards, indicating the remarkable geographical scope of trade networks that utilized salmonid silver as a medium of exchange. The standardization of Islamic commercial law across Central Asian territories eliminated many of the legal complexities that had previously complicated international trade relationships. Islamic legal scholars developed comprehensive frameworks for handling commercial disputes, contractual arrangements, and partnership agreements that could be applied consistently across different regions and cultural contexts. The concept of the Islamic Ummah, or community of believers, created legal presumptions of trustworthiness and shared obligations that facilitated business relationships between merchants who had never met personally. The development of the Hawala system during this period revolutionized long-distance commercial finance by enabling merchants to transfer funds across vast distances without physically transporting precious metals or coins. This system relied on networks of trusted agents who maintained detailed records of financial obligations and periodically settled accounts through various compensation mechanisms. A merchant in Bukhara could deposit silver with a local Hawala agent and authorize a colleague in Damascus to collect equivalent value from the agent's correspondent, eliminating the risks and costs associated with transporting currency across dangerous territories. Hawala operations required extensive communication networks and sophisticated record-keeping systems that connected commercial communities across the Islamic world. The system's effectiveness depended on the reliability of participating agents and the accuracy of exchange rate information transmitted between different commercial centers. Islamic merchants developed standardized procedures for calculating exchange rates, accounting for transportation costs, and managing the timing differences involved in long-distance financial transactions. The integration of Islamic territories into existing Silk Road networks proceeded through gradual modification of established commercial practices rather than wholesale replacement of existing systems. Islamic merchants learned to work within traditional Central Asian trading customs while introducing new financial instruments and legal frameworks that enhanced commercial efficiency. This pragmatic approach enabled Islamic commercial expansion without disrupting the fundamental economic relationships that sustained long-distance trade. Bukhara's rise as a major intellectual center complemented its commercial importance, creating a unique environment where Islamic scholarship flourished alongside international trade activities. The city's madrasas attracted students from across the Islamic world, while its libraries preserved and transmitted classical texts from Greek, Persian, and Indian sources. The famous physician and philosopher Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, spent his formative years in Bukhara, where he had access to an extraordinary collection of philosophical and scientific manuscripts that shaped his intellectual development. The translation movement that characterized Islamic intellectual life during the 9th and 10th centuries relied heavily on the cosmopolitan commercial networks that connected Islamic territories with other cultural regions. Merchants traveling to India, China, and Byzantine territories frequently carried manuscripts and books that they sold to Islamic scholars and libraries. This commercial trade in intellectual materials enabled Islamic scholars to access Greek philosophical texts, Indian mathematical treatises, and Chinese scientific works that would have been otherwise unavailable. Islamic scholars working in Central Asian cities like Samarkand and Bukhara developed sophisticated techniques for translating and preserving classical knowledge from various cultural traditions. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad served as the most famous center for this activity, but similar institutions in Central Asian cities played equally important roles in preserving and transmitting classical learning. These scholarly activities often received financial support from wealthy merchants who recognized the practical value of scientific and mathematical knowledge for their commercial operations. The preservation of Greek philosophical texts through Arabic translations proved crucial for the eventual transmission of classical knowledge to medieval Europe. Islamic scholars not only translated Greek works, but also wrote extensive commentaries that clarified difficult concepts and connected Greek philosophical ideas with Islamic theological principles. These commentaries often incorporated insights from Persian and Indian philosophical traditions that Islamic scholars had encountered through commercial and cultural exchanges along the Silk Road. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge from Indian sources reached Islamic scholars primarily through commercial networks that connected Central Asian cities with Indian trading centers. Islamic mathematicians learned Indian numerical systems and computational techniques that they refined and transmitted throughout the Islamic world. The adoption of Indian numerical notation, including the concept of zero, revolutionized mathematical calculation and enabled the development of more sophisticated commercial accounting systems. Chinese technological knowledge reached Islamic territories through various channels, including captured artisans, diplomatic exchanges, and commercial relationships with Chinese merchants who continued to operate in Central Asian markets despite the political changes following the Battle of Talas. Islamic craftsmen learned Chinese techniques for silk production, porcelain manufacture, and metallurgy, adapting these technologies to local conditions and market requirements. The westward transmission of papermaking technology from Samarkand to other Islamic cities created a revolution in administrative and intellectual life throughout the Islamic world. Paper production facilities established in Baghdad, Damascus, and other major cities provided affordable writing materials that enabled the expansion of bureaucratic record-keeping, commercial documentation, and scholarly writing. The availability of inexpensive paper facilitated the development of Islamic banking systems that required extensive written records of financial transactions. Islamic merchants developed new categories of trade goods that reflected the religious and cultural preferences of Islamic consumers. The prohibition on silk clothing for men in Islamic law created demand for alternative luxury textiles, leading to increased trade in fine wool fabrics, cotton textiles, and various blended materials. Islamic merchants also specialized in trade goods that supported religious observance, including prayer rugs, incense, and various items used in mosque decoration and religious ceremonies. The pilgrimage trade to Mecca created new commercial opportunities that Islamic merchants along the Silk Road exploited effectively. Pilgrims traveling from Central Asia, China, and other distant regions required transportation, accommodation, and various goods and services during their journeys. Islamic merchants established specialized businesses that catered to pilgrim needs, while also using pilgrimage routes to transport commercial goods between different regions of the Islamic world. The development of Islamic commercial partnerships, known as mudaraba arrangements, enabled merchants to pool resources and share risks in ways that facilitated larger and more ambitious trading ventures. These partnerships typically involved one party providing capital while another contributed labor and expertise, with profits shared according to predetermined formulas. The legal framework governing mudaraba relationships provided security for investors while enabling entrepreneurial merchants to access capital for trading activities. Islamic commercial law's emphasis on ethical business practices and fair dealing created trust relationships that facilitated long-distance trade, even between merchants who belonged to different ethnic or cultural groups. The Islamic prohibition on usury led to the development of alternative financing mechanisms that achieved similar economic functions without violating religious principles. These innovations in commercial finance enabled Islamic merchants to compete effectively with non-Islamic trading networks while maintaining religious compliance. The expansion of Islamic influence along the Silk Road coincided with significant technological innovations in transportation and logistics. Islamic merchants developed improved caravan organization techniques that increased the efficiency and safety of long-distance travel. These improvements included better methods for loading and securing cargo, more effective systems for managing pack animals, and enhanced security arrangements that reduced losses from banditry and natural hazards. The construction of caravanserais at regular intervals along major trade routes provided standardized accommodation and services for traveling merchants. These facilities, typically built around fortified courtyards with secure storage areas and animal pens, offered protection from both weather and human threats. The caravanserais also served as information centers where merchants could obtain current intelligence about market conditions, route safety, and political developments in distant regions. Islamic urban planning in Central Asian cities reflected the integration of commercial and religious functions that characterized Islamic civilization. The central bazaars in cities like Samarkand and Bukhara were typically located near the main mosques, creating commercial districts where religious and economic activities reinforced each other. The architectural design of these commercial areas facilitated both individual transactions and large-scale wholesale operations that supplied regional distribution networks. The fragmented political landscape that characterized Central Asia since the decline of unified Islamic authority created perfect conditions for the most dramatic transformation in Silk Road history. By the early 13th century, the Khwarezmid Empire controlled much of Transoxiana and eastern Iran, while various Turkic and local rulers governed smaller territories throughout the region. Chinese authority had long since retreated to areas east of the Jade Gate, leaving the western portions of traditional trade routes under the control of competing local powers who frequently disrupted commercial activities through warfare, excessive taxation, and arbitrary policy changes. Into this fractured political environment emerged Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, whose military innovations and organizational genius would create the largest contiguous land empire in human history. Born around 1162 AD into a minor Mongol clan struggling for survival on the harsh steppes north of China, Temujin's early experiences with tribal warfare, resource scarcity, and political instability shaped his understanding of the relationship between military power and economic prosperity. His rise to supremacy among the Mongol tribes between 1196 and 1206 AD demonstrated unprecedented ability to integrate diverse nomadic groups into a unified military organization capable of conquering sedentary civilizations. The Mongol military system that Genghis Khan developed represented a revolutionary synthesis of traditional steppe warfare tactics, with innovative organizational structures and strategic concepts borrowed from various sources. Mongol armies, organized around decimal units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000 warriors, created flexible command structures that could adapt rapidly to changing battlefield conditions. Each warrior maintained multiple horses, enabling Mongol forces to cover vast distances at speeds that consistently surprised their enemies and disrupted conventional defensive preparations. Mongol siege warfare capabilities, initially limited by their nomadic background, expanded dramatically through the systematic recruitment of Chinese, Persian, and Central Asian engineers and craftsmen who possessed specialized knowledge of fortification, construction, and siege equipment operation. The Mongols' willingness to adopt and improve upon foreign military technologies, combined with their ability to coordinate massive siege operations involving tens of thousands of workers, enabled them to capture fortified cities that had previously been considered impregnable. The conquest of the Western Xia Kingdom between 1205 and 1209 AD provided Genghis Khan with his first experience in governing sedentary agricultural populations whose economic systems differed fundamentally from nomadic pastoral traditions. The Mongols discovered that systematic exploitation of agricultural surplus could generate far greater wealth than traditional nomadic raiding, leading to the development of administrative policies that balanced extraction of resources with maintenance of productive capacity. These early experiments in sedentary governance provided crucial experience that influenced later Mongol administration of much larger and more complex territories. The Jin dynasty's territories in northern China presented the Mongols with their most challenging military and administrative obstacles during the campaigns that began in 1211 AD. The Jin possessed sophisticated defensive systems, professional armies equipped with advanced weaponry, and complex bureaucratic structures that had governed millions of people for over a century. Mongol success against the Jin required not only military conquest but also the development of administrative capabilities that could manage Chinese agricultural systems, urban populations, and commercial networks without destroying the economic foundations that made these territories valuable. Mongol administrative practices in conquered Chinese territories demonstrated remarkable pragmatism in adapting traditional considerants, the salam dollars, Chinese governmental systems to Mongol requirements. Rather than replacing Chinese bureaucrats wholesale, the Mongols retained experienced administrators while installing Mongol supervisors who monitored their activities and ensured compliance with imperial policies. This approach preserved essential administrative expertise while establishing Mongol political control over complex governmental systems that would have been impossible for nomadic administrators to operate independently. The Destruction of the Khwarezmid Empire between 1219 and 1221 AD eliminated the last major obstacle to Mongol control over Central Asian trade routes, but the campaign's devastating impact on urban centers like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Merv initially disrupted commercial activities throughout the region. Contemporary accounts describe the wholesale destruction of irrigation systems, the massacre of urban populations, and the abandonment of agricultural areas that had supported trade route cities for centuries. These destructive campaigns reflected Genghis Khan's strategic calculation that complete elimination of resistance was preferable to prolonged occupation warfare that would tie down Mongol forces needed for other conquests. Recovery of Central Asian commercial centers following their initial destruction revealed the Mongols' growing understanding of the relationship between urban prosperity and imperial revenue. Mongol administrators began implementing policies designed to attract merchants and craftsmen back to devastated cities, offering tax incentives, security guarantees, and infrastructure investments that gradually restored commercial activities. The reconstruction of Samarkand during the 1222 exemplified this approach, as Mongol officials recruited skilled artisans from various regions and provided them with resources and protection needed to re-establish productive workshops and commercial facilities. Genghis Khan's legal innovations, codified in the Yasa, established uniform standards for commercial transactions, criminal justice, and administrative procedures across the vast expanse of Mongol territories. The Yasa's provisions regarding merchant protection, contract enforcement, and dispute resolution created legal frameworks that facilitated long-distance trade by reducing uncertainties and risks that had previously complicated international commercial relationships. Merchants operating under Mongol protection could rely on consistent legal treatment, regardless of their ethnic background or the specific territories through which they traveled. The Mongol postal system, known as the Yam, represented the most sophisticated communication network in medieval history, enabling rapid transmission of information across distances that had previously required months or years for message delivery. The system operated through a network of relay stations positioned at intervals of approximately 25 miles along major routes, each station maintaining fresh horses and riders capable of carrying imperial messages at unprecedented speeds. A message from Karakorum could reach European territories in 6 weeks, while communications to Chinese territories required only 3 weeks. Yam stations provided not only communication services, but also accommodation and logistical support for authorized travelers, including merchants carrying imperial trading permits. These facilities offered secure lodging, fresh pack animals, and route information that significantly reduced the costs and risks associated with long-distance travel. The standardization of services across the entire Yam network created predictable travel conditions that enabled merchants to plan complex trading expeditions with greater confidence in their ability to complete planned itineraries. The integration of conquered territories into a unified administrative system required the development of standardized currency and measurement systems that could facilitate commercial transactions across culturally diverse regions. Mongol administrators adopted silver as the primary medium of exchange for high-value transactions while permitting local currencies to continue circulating for smaller commercial activities. This dual currency system provided flexibility for different types of commercial transactions while establishing imperial control over major financial flows. Mongol trade policies actively encouraged long-distance commerce through tax reductions, infrastructure investments, and diplomatic arrangements that eliminated many of the obstacles that had previously complicated international trade. The Mongols reduced or eliminated customs duties on goods transiting their territories, recognizing that increased trade volumes would generate greater total revenue than high taxation rates that discouraged commercial activities. This approach proved remarkably successful in attracting merchants from across Eurasia to utilize Mongol-controlled trade routes. The Pax Mongolica period, extending roughly from 1260 to 1350 AD, created unprecedented conditions for cultural exchange and technological transmission across Eurasia. The political stability and commercial security provided by unified Mongol administration enabled scholars, artisans, and religious teachers to travel safely across vast distances, carrying ideas and techniques that would have remained isolated within their regions of origin under previous political conditions. This period witnessed accelerated transmission of innovations in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and various crafts that enriched civilizations across the entire Eurasian continent. Chinese technological knowledge reached Middle Eastern and European territories during this period through systematic Mongol policies that relocated skilled craftsmen and scholars to regions where their expertise could contribute to imperial objectives. Chinese engineers working on Middle Eastern irrigation projects introduced new techniques for water management and agricultural development, while Chinese medical practitioners shared knowledge of surgical procedures and pharmaceutical preparations that enhanced medical capabilities in Islamic territories. The westward transmission of gunpowder technology during the Mongol period revolutionized military capabilities across Eurasia, though the full implications of this technological transfer would not become apparent until the 14th and 15th centuries. Mongol armies utilized Chinese explosive devices and early firearms in their European campaigns, introducing these technologies to regions that quickly recognized their military potential and began developing their own weapons production capabilities. Islamic astronomical and mathematical knowledge traveled eastward through Mongol networks, reaching Chinese scholars who incorporated Islamic computational techniques and observational methods into their own scientific traditions. The Han Dynasty's astronomical bureau employed Islamic astronomers who brought sophisticated mathematical tools and theoretical frameworks that enhanced Chinese astronomical capabilities. These exchanges created hybrid scientific traditions that combined the best elements of different cultural approaches to understanding natural phenomena. The establishment of Mongol capitals at Karakorum and later Khanbalik created new centers for international commerce that attracted merchants from across the known world. These cities featured markets where goods from Europe, the Middle East, Central Asia, China, and India could be found in close proximity, creating commercial opportunities that had never previously existed. The cosmopolitan character of these Mongol capitals facilitated cultural exchanges and business relationships that transcended traditional ethnic and religious boundaries. Marco Polo's journey to China between 1271 and 1295 AD occurred during the height of Mongol power, when the political stability and commercial infrastructure created by Mongol administration made such extended travel both possible and profitable. Polo's family belonged to a network of Venetian merchants who had recognized the commercial opportunities created by Mongol unification of Eurasian trade routes. Their success in establishing trading relationships with Mongol authorities demonstrated the practical benefits of the Pax Mongolica for European commercial expansion. The detailed observations recorded in Marco Polo's account provide invaluable documentation of commercial conditions, urban development, and cultural practices throughout the Mongol Empire during the late 13th century. His descriptions of Chinese cities, manufacturing techniques, and commercial practices introduced European audiences to economic possibilities that would influence European exploration and trade policies for centuries. Polo's account of paper money usage in China particularly impressed European readers who had never encountered government-issued currency not backed by precious metals. Other European travelers during the Mongol period, including Giovanni da Pian del Carpine, provide additional evidence for the unprecedented level of East-West contact that characterized this era. These travelers consistently reported on the safety and efficiency of travel under Mongol protection, contrasting their experiences favorably with the dangers and uncertainties that had characterized earlier attempts at long-distance travel. The Mongol Empire's religious tolerance policies created conditions that facilitated the spread of various religious traditions across Eurasia. Nestorian Christianity reached China in unprecedented numbers during the Mongol period, while Islamic scholars and religious teachers gained access to Chinese territories that had previously been largely closed to foreign religious influences. Buddhist monasteries in Central Asian territories received protection and support from Mongol administrators, enabling them to maintain their educational and cultural functions despite the political upheavals of the conquest period. Mongol patronage of international scholarship created intellectual communities that transcended traditional cultural boundaries. The court at Khanbalik employed scholars from across Eurasia, creating an environment where Chinese, Islamic, European, and Central Asian intellectual traditions could interact and influence each other. These scholarly exchanges produced innovations in various fields that combined insights from different cultural traditions in ways that would not have been possible without Mongol political unification. The gradual dissolution of Mongol unity during the late 13th and early 14th centuries coincided with devastating demographic catastrophes that fundamentally altered the economic foundation supporting Silk Road commerce. The Black Death, which swept across Eurasian trade networks between 1347 and 1351 AD, followed established commercial routes with terrifying efficiency, transforming the very pathways that had facilitated centuries of prosperity into conduits for unprecedented mortality. The plague's origins in Central Asian rodent populations meant that trading cities along traditional Silk Road routes experienced some of the highest death rates, with contemporary accounts describing the complete abandonment of entire commercial districts in cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar. The demographic collapse in Central Asian trading centers disrupted the intricate networks of commercial relationships, specialized knowledge, and financial arrangements that had sustained long-distance overland trade. Merchant families who had maintained trading partnerships across multiple generations found their operations crippled by the loss of experienced traders, local contacts, and the specialized linguistic and cultural knowledge necessary for navigating complex international transactions. The Hawala banking system, which had depended on personal relationships and reputation networks spanning thousands of miles, collapsed in many regions as key participants succumbed to disease or fled to safer territories. Surviving merchants discovered that the infrastructure supporting overland trade had deteriorated dramatically during the plague. Caravanserais that had provided essential services for traveling merchants stood empty or had been converted to other purposes, while the specialized craftsmen who had maintained pack animals, repaired equipment, and provided route guidance had either died or abandoned their trades. The knowledge of seasonal travel conditions, water sources, and safe passage routes that had been accumulated over centuries of commercial experience was lost, as experienced guides and caravan leaders perished without passing their expertise to successors. The political fragmentation that followed the collapse of unified Mongol administration created additional obstacles for merchants attempting to rebuild overland trading networks. The Yuan dynasty's fall in 1368 AD and replacement by the Ming dynasty marked the end of the cosmopolitan trade-friendly policies that had characterized Mongol rule in China. The new Ming administration, led by Emperor Hongwu, implemented isolationist policies that severely restricted foreign merchant access to Chinese territories and eliminated many of the legal protections and commercial privileges that had attracted international traders to Chinese markets. Ming officials viewed foreign merchants with suspicion, considering them potential security threats who might provide intelligence to hostile powers or introduce destabilizing foreign influences into Chinese society. The tributary system that replaced open commercial relationships required foreign traders to obtain official permits, submit to extensive bureaucratic procedures, and conduct business only through government-approved channels. These restrictions dramatically increased the costs and uncertainties associated with trading with China, making overland routes less attractive compared to emerging maritime alternatives. The Chagatai Khanate's fragmentation into competing successor states created a patchwork of conflicting authorities along Central Asian trade routes, each imposing its own taxation systems, legal requirements, and security arrangements. Merchants traveling from China to Middle Eastern markets now faced multiple border crossings, currency exchanges, and diplomatic negotiations that had been unnecessary during the period of unified Mongol administration. The absence of standardized commercial law meant that contractual disputes could not be resolved through consistent legal procedures, while the lack of coordinated security arrangements left merchant caravans vulnerable to banditry and local conflicts. Tamerlane's campaigns during the late 14th century brought temporary political unification to much of Central Asia, but his military methods caused additional damage to the urban centers and agricultural systems that supported trade route operations. While Tamerlane's court at Samarkand became a center for artistic and intellectual activity, his frequent military campaigns disrupted commercial activities throughout the region. The enormous resources devoted to military operations reduced the capital available for commercial investment, While the constant threat of warfare made long-term business planning extremely difficult, the rise of the Ottoman Empire in Anatolia and the Balkans created new political dynamics that affected traditional overland trade routes, connecting Asia with European markets. Ottoman control over Constantinople after 1453 AD gave them significant influence over trade between Asia and Europe. But Ottoman policies toward long-distance commerce reflected different priorities from those of earlier powers that had facilitated Silk Road trade. The Ottomans focused primarily on controlling and taxing existing trade flows rather than promoting expanded commercial activities, leading to increased costs for merchants using traditional overland routes. Ottoman taxation policies imposed substantial customs duties on goods transiting their territories, while their administrative systems created bureaucratic obstacles that delayed merchant caravans and increased operational costs. The Ottomans also implemented currency controls that complicated international financial transactions, requiring merchants to exchange currencies at official rates that often differed significantly from market values. These policies made overland routes through Ottoman territories less competitive compared to maritime alternatives that could bypass Ottoman control entirely. The Portuguese exploration of maritime routes around Africa represented the most significant challenge to traditional overland Silk Road networks. Vasco da Gama's successful voyage to India in 1497 to 1499 AD demonstrated that European merchants could reach Asian markets without relying on the complex overland networks that had previously been essential for east-west trade. The Portuguese discovery that maritime routes could deliver Asian goods to European markets at lower costs and with greater reliability marked the beginning of the end for traditional Silk Road commerce. Portuguese maritime technology, including improved ship design, navigation instruments, and sailing techniques, enabled them to transport larger cargo volumes over greater distances than had been possible with overland caravans. A single Portuguese carrack could carry as much silk as dozens of camel caravans, while the maritime route from Lisbon to Goa required only 6 to 8 months compared to the year or more needed for overland travel from China to European markets. The reduced transportation time meant that perishable goods could reach markets in better condition, while the lower transportation costs enabled Portuguese merchants to offer competitive prices for Asian products. The establishment of Portuguese trading posts at Goa, Malacca, and Macau created new commercial networks that competed directly with traditional Silk Road routes. These maritime networks offered several advantages over overland alternatives, including more reliable scheduling, reduced security risks, and simplified administrative procedures. Portuguese merchants could conduct business through their own colonial administrators rather than negotiating with multiple foreign authorities, while Portuguese naval power provided security that was often more effective than the protection arrangements available along overland routes. The Spanish establishment of trans-Pacific trade routes connecting the Philippines with Mexico created additional maritime alternatives to traditional overland networks. The Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, beginning in 1565 AD, enabled Asian goods to reach American and European markets through Pacific and Atlantic maritime routes that completely bypassed traditional Silk Road territories. Chinese silk, porcelain, and spices could now reach European consumers through Spanish colonial networks that offered competitive prices and reliable delivery schedules. The Dutch entry into Asian maritime trade during the early 17th century intensified competition with overland routes through their development of highly efficient commercial operations that maximized profits while minimizing costs. The Dutch East India Company's systematic approach to Asian trade included innovations in shipping technology, commercial organization, and financial management that set new standards for international commerce. Dutch merchants could offer Asian goods in European markets at prices that made overland alternatives economically unviable for most categories of trade. Chinese maritime exploration under the Ming Dynasty initially appeared to offer opportunities for integrating traditional overland networks with new maritime alternatives. Admiral Zheng, his 7 major expeditions between 1405 and 1433 AD, demonstrated Chinese capabilities in long-distance maritime navigation and established diplomatic relationships with rulers throughout Southeast Asia, India, and the Western Indian Ocean. These expeditions utilized massive treasure fleets, that included ships far larger than any European vessels of the period, carrying crews numbering in the thousands and cargo capacities that dwarfed contemporary European maritime operations. However, the Ming dynasty's decision to abandon large-scale maritime expeditions after 1433 AD reflected changing priorities that favored continental defense over maritime expansion. The growing threat from northern nomadic groups, particularly the resurgent Mongol Confederation under Genghis Khan, required enormous military resources that the imperial government could not simultaneously devote to both maritime exploration and continental defense. The costs associated with maintaining large naval fleets and overseas bases appeared increasingly difficult to justify when faced with immediate security threats along China's northern borders. The abandonment of Zheng He's maritime program marked a crucial turning point in global trade development, as Chinese withdrawal from Indian Ocean commerce created opportunities that European maritime powers quickly exploited. Had China continued its maritime expansion, the development of global trade networks might have proceeded very differently, potentially maintaining greater balance between overland and maritime commercial systems. Instead, Chinese maritime withdrawal enabled European powers to establish dominant positions in Asian maritime trade that gradually undermined the economic foundations supporting traditional overland routes. The transformation of global trade patterns during this period represented more than simple substitution of maritime routes for overland alternatives. The new maritime networks enabled different types of commercial relationships, supported different categories of goods, and created different patterns of cultural exchange than had characterized traditional overland systems. While maritime routes proved more efficient for transporting bulk commodities and standardized manufactured goods, they offered fewer opportunities for the complex cultural interactions and technological exchanges that had enriched civilizations along traditional Silk Road networks. The collapse of traditional Silk Road commerce during the enduring 15th and 16th centuries created a historical memory that would gradually be rediscovered and romanticized during the modern era. The archaeological expeditions and scholarly investigations of the 19th and 20th centuries would reveal the extraordinary achievements of Silk Road civilizations, creating renewed interest in the historical trade routes and inspiring contemporary efforts to revive economic and cultural connections across Eurasia. The modern rediscovery of the Silk Road began with European archaeological problem expeditions during the late 19th century. As Russian and British imperial rivalries brought European powers into direct contact with Central Asian territories, scholars and explorers began documenting the ruins of ancient trading cities that had been gradually abandoned since the decline of overland commerce. These expeditions produced the first systematic archaeological evidence of Silk Road civilizations, revealing architectural remains, artistic treasures, and documentary materials that demonstrated the extraordinary cultural sophistication of medieval Central Asian societies. Aurel Stein's expeditions to the Taklamakan Desert and Tarim Basin between 1900 and 1916 resulted in the discovery of extraordinary archaeological treasures that revolutionized understanding of Silk Road history and culture. His systematic excavation techniques and careful documentation of findings established new standards for archaeological work in Central Asian environments. Stein's discovery of the sealed library cave at Dunhuang in 1907 provided access to one of the most important collections of medieval manuscripts and documents ever found. The cave, sealed in the 11th century, contained over 40,000 documents in multiple languages and scripts that documented nearly every aspect of Silk Road civilization during its peak period. These materials included Buddhist texts, commercial contracts, official correspondence, literary works, and administrative documents that provided unprecedented insight into the complexity and sophistication of medieval Central Asian society. The manuscripts revealed details about commercial practices, religious beliefs, artistic traditions, and daily life that had been lost to historical memory. Paul Pelliot's French expeditions to Central Asia, conducted simultaneously with Stein's work, employed different methods but achieved similarly significant results in documenting Silk Road heritage. Pelliot's linguistic expertise enabled him to read and evaluate manuscripts in their original languages, allowing him to select materials of particular historical and cultural significance. His work at Dunhuang and other sites resulted in the acquisition of important manuscript collections for French institutions while contributing to scholarly understanding of Central Asian languages and literature. German expeditions to Central Asia, led by archaeologists like Albert von Lecoq, focused particularly on sites in the Tarim Basin where German researchers conducted systematic excavations of Buddhist monasteries and associated settlements. Von Lecoq's work at sites like Bezeklik and Turpan uncovered wall paintings, sculptures, and architectural remains that documented the artistic achievements of Central Asian Buddhist communities during the medieval period. The German expeditions employed advanced photographic techniques that preserved visual records of archaeological discoveries with unprecedented accuracy and detail. The documentation of Silk Road heritage through these archaeological expeditions occurred at a crucial historical moment when traditional cultural patterns were being disrupted by political changes and modernization efforts. Many of the sites excavated by European archaeologists were already suffering from neglect, vandalism, and natural deterioration that threatened to destroy irreplaceable cultural materials. The archaeological work, despite its problematic aspects regarding cultural ownership, preserved knowledge and artifacts that might otherwise have been lost entirely. The establishment of the Soviet Union fundamentally altered the political landscape of Central Asian territories that had been crucial components of historical Silk Road networks. Soviet policies toward Central Asian republics reflected complex tensions between modernization objectives and cultural preservation concerns. The Communist Party's commitment to rapid industrialization and social transformation often conflicted with traditional ways of life that had preserved elements of Silk Road cultural heritage. Soviet archaeological programs in Central Asia during the 1922nd and 1932nd approached Silk Road heritage from materialist, historical perspectives that emphasized economic relationships and class conflicts rather than cultural exchange and international cooperation. Soviet archaeologists conducted extensive excavations at sites throughout Central Asia, producing valuable scientific documentation while interpreting their findings according to Marxist-Leninist theoretical frameworks. These interpretations often emphasized the exploitation of common people by merchant elites and ruling classes rather than celebrating the cultural achievements that had emerged from commercial prosperity. The emergence of independent nation-states in Central Asia, following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, created new political conditions that enabled renewed interest in Silk Road heritage as a source of national identity and international land recognition. Countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan began promoting their historical connections to Silk Road civilizations as part of efforts to establish distinct national cultures and attract international tourism and investment. This post-Soviet rediscovery of Silk Road heritage often emphasized the positive aspects of historical cultural exchange, while downplaying the conflicts and exploitation that had also characterized ancient trade networks. UNESCO's World Heritage Program provided international recognition and preservation support for Silk Road archaeological sites, beginning in the 1982nd. The designation of sites like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Khiva as World Heritage locations acknowledged their outstanding universal value, while providing frameworks for conservation efforts that balance preservation needs with modern development pressures. These UNESCO designations also enhanced the international profile of Central Asian cultural heritage, contributing to growing global awareness of Silk Road history and its contemporary relevance. Chinese economic reforms beginning in the 1982nd created new opportunities for developing Western Chinese territories that included important historical Silk Road regions. The government's Western Development Strategy, launched in 2000, included substantial investments in transportation infrastructure, urban development, and tourism promotion that affected areas like Xinjiang, Gansu, and other provinces with significant Silk Road heritage. These development efforts often emphasized the historical importance of Silk Road connections while pursuing modernization objectives that sometimes conflicted with heritage preservation priorities. The launch of China's Belt and Decommissions Road Initiative in 2013 represented the most ambitious attempt to revive Silk Road connectivity since the medieval period. President Xi Jinping's announcement of the initiative during visits to Kazakhstan and Indonesia explicitly referenced historical Silk Road networks, while proposing modern infrastructure development projects that would connect Asia, Europe, and Africa through land and maritime routes. The initiative's scope, involving potential investments exceeding $1 trillion across more than 60 countries, demonstrated China's commitment to recreating the economic integration that had characterized historical Silk Road networks. The Belt and Road Initiative's land-based components include railway construction projects that follow routes similar to ancient Silk Road pathways while utilizing modern technology to overcome geographical obstacles that had challenged historical travelers. The China-Europe Railway Express service, connecting Chinese manufacturing centers with European markets through Kazakhstan, Russia, and Belarus, enables cargo shipments to travel between China and Europe in approximately 2 weeks, compared to the month or more required for maritime transportation. This service demonstrates how modern technology can revive the speed advantages that had made land routes competitive with maritime alternatives during certain historical periods. Infrastructure development projects associated with the Seng Sandits Belt and Road Initiative include port construction, highway development, and telecommunications networks that create modern equivalents of the caravanserais, roads, and communication systems that had supported historical Silk Road commerce. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, involving investments in transportation infrastructure, energy projects, and industrial development, exemplifies how contemporary connectivity projects can transform regional economic relationships, while referencing historical precedents for cross-border cooperation and trade. The Belt and Road Initiative's emphasis on cultural exchange and people-to-people connections explicitly acknowledges the cultural dimensions of historical Silk Road networks, while promoting contemporary educational exchanges, tourism development, and cultural preservation projects. Chinese universities have established Confucius Institutes in Central Asian countries, while cultural festivals and artistic exchanges celebrate shared heritage and promote mutual understanding. These cultural components of the initiative recognize that successful economic integration requires the kind of cross-cultural relationships that had characterized historical Silk Road civilizations. Contemporary archaeological research at Silk Road sites continues to reveal new information about ancient trade networks, while utilizing advanced technologies that enable more sophisticated analysis of archaeological evidence. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and other remote sensing technologies allow archaeologists to identify buried structures and survey large areas without destructive excavation. DNA analysis of ancient human remains provides information about population movements and cultural interactions, while chemical analysis of artifacts reveals details about trade relationships and manufacturing techniques. The application of digital technologies to Silk Road heritage preservation includes virtual reality reconstructions of ancient sites, online databases of archaeological findings, and digital archives of historical manuscripts. These technologies enable global audiences to experience Silk Road heritage without traveling to remote locations, while providing researchers with new tools for analyzing and interpreting historical evidence. The digitization of manuscript collections from sites like Dunhuang makes these materials accessible to scholars worldwide while reducing handling of fragile original documents. International academic collaborations focused on Silk Road research bring together scholars from multiple countries to investigate questions that require expertise in diverse languages, cultures, and historical traditions. Silk Road studies programs at various universities facilitate interdisciplinary research that combines archaeology, history, linguistics, art history, and other fields to develop comprehensive understanding of Silk Road civilizations. These collaborative approaches recognize that Silk Road history cannot be fully understood from any single national or cultural perspective. The influence of Silk Road cultural exchanges on contemporary art, cuisine, and cultural practices demonstrates the enduring legacy of ancient connectivity patterns. Fusion cuisine in major cities worldwide often combines ingredients and cooking techniques that originally spread along Silk Road networks, while contemporary artists draw inspiration from the multicultural artistic traditions that developed in ancient trading cities. Fashion designers incorporate textile patterns and decorative motifs that originated in Silk Road workshops, while musicians experiment with combinations of instruments and musical styles that echo the cultural synthesis that characterized medieval Central Asian cities. Modern tourism development in Central Asian countries increasingly emphasizes Silk Road heritage as a means of attracting international visitors and generating economic benefits for local communities. Tourism infrastructure projects include hotels, restaurants, and transportation services designed to accommodate visitors interested in experiencing Silk Road history and culture. These developments create economic opportunities for local populations while raising awareness of Central Asian cultural heritage among international audiences. The challenges facing contemporary Silk Road heritage preservation include urban development pressures, climate change impacts, and the need to balance conservation objectives with economic development needs. Rapid urbanization in Central Asian cities threatens archaeological sites through construction projects and infrastructure development, while climate change affects the preservation conditions at desert sites and mountain locations. International conservation organizations work with local authorities to develop preservation strategies that protect cultural heritage while accommodating legitimate development needs. Educational initiatives promoting Silk Road history and cultural heritage include curriculum development projects, teacher training programs, and educational materials designed for various age groups and cultural contexts. These programs aim to increase awareness of Silk Road heritage while promoting values of cultural tolerance, international cooperation, and peaceful exchange that characterize the best aspects of historical Silk Road civilizations. Educational exchanges enable students from different countries to learn about shared heritage while developing cross-cultural understanding and communication skills. The contemporary relevance of Silk Road history extends beyond understanding academic interest and heritage preservation to include practical lessons for modern international relations and economic development. The success of historical Silk Road networks demonstrates the benefits of cultural openness, commercial cooperation, and peaceful exchange between different civilizations. These historical examples provide models for contemporary efforts to build international partnerships and address global challenges through collaborative approaches that respect cultural diversity while pursuing common objectives. As we reach the end of our journey tonight, we've traced the Silk Road from its origins in Han Dynasty diplomatic missions through centuries of prosperity and cultural exchange, followed its transformation under Islamic rule, witnessed its golden age under Mongol unification, and observed its gradual decline as maritime routes replaced overland networks. We've seen how the ancient Silk Road created unprecedented connections between civilizations, facilitated the exchange of not just goods, but ideas, technologies, and artistic traditions, and left a cultural legacy that continues to influence our interconnected world today. The story of the Silk Road reminds us that human beings have always sought connections across cultural boundaries, that commerce and cultural exchange can create mutual understanding and shared prosperity, and that the pathways we build between civilizations, whether physical roads or digital networks, shape the world we inhabit. The modern revival of Silk Road connectivity through initiatives like the Belt and Road demonstrates that the vision of a connected, cooperative world that emerged from ancient trading relationships remains a powerful force for positive change in our contemporary global civilization. If you enjoyed this journey through Silk Road history, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more explorations of history's most fascinating stories. Thank you for listening, and until next time, sleep well.